Hello everyone, this is Farida Mukajanova, and in this video presentation I'd like to speak about the dynamics of English language. I'd like to have a look at how English language works, how it develops and changes over time, and how it reflects modern day reality. I'm going to get a little bit nerdy and have some fun with English, and I hope you can learn something from this video and take something away. A few words about myself. I've been an English teacher since 2006. I use English on a everyday basis, and so I have a lot of interest in this language. And I always look at it, I investigate how it works, and so I decided to put it all together into one presentation to cover a few things that I find really fascinating and interesting that I'd like to share with you. So feel free to participate with the help of comments, leave your questions if you have any, and if you find this presentation interesting and useful, please subscribe and hit the like button. So let's go. And the first thing that I'd like to talk about is how pop culture influences any language. So, guys, can you think of any words, expressions, any phrases that come from songs, from comic books, from movies, from cartoons, from literature? Well, I think anybody can come up with some ideas here, because this is a really big topic. There are tons of pop culture references in English language, but I'd like to zero in on this series. How series influence English language and how they even shape it. And here I'd like to start with a little personal story about myself. I come from Kazakhstan, and I was born in the Soviet Union, so I got introduced to Western series in my adulthood. And some time ago, maybe about 8 years ago or so, I didn't quite know what Seinfeld was. I've seen this word here and there, I've heard of it, but I haven't watched the series, so I didn't really know what that is and why it is so important. And my colleague at the language school where I was working at that time mentioned a phrase, and he was so shocked when he realized that I didn't know the phrase and I didn't know where it came from. He was just blown away how somebody in the world could not know, but I did not know because I had never watched any episode of Seinfeld. And so this is how I got introduced to this world of Seinfeld. And I'm really grateful for this experience, because it did open up a lot to me in terms of language, at least. And so that helped me to become a better English teacher as well, and to bring in more of cultural references like this into my teaching. And I do mention that to my students. And sometimes they are really amazed at how a series like that, and an old series, if you think about it, can actually be so important in a language. So here you can see some examples of what Seinfeld gave to English language, and maybe and probably the most famous phrases of all is "no soup for you," and "soup Nazi" comes from the same episode of Seinfeld. I'm going to leave a comment if you want to review it. And here I'm just going to mention that I think Grammar Nazi and any spin-offs would not exist if this episode and this joke became so big and so popular. So, how many Seinfeld words and phrases do you use, and why should you care? Well, here is an article that appeared in July 2019, 20 years after the show appeared, and it covers 15 phrases that Seinfeld spawned. But in fact, there are much more than these 15 phrases that are still in use. You can find whole websites dedicated to this phenomenon, and this is just amazing. And I think it's a great example of how a particular series can have such a major impact on a language that still persists 2 decades later. And a little bit more series of today. And here I cannot mention Netflix without saying that Netflix itself gave rise to a lot of phrases and vocabulary. Can you think of any? Well, here are a few phrases that are interesting to look at it. So, of course, there's Netflix and chill that we know very well, and there are variants of that. Now, there's a phenomenon as Netflix cheating, when you're watching an episode before your spouse or your partner, and that's a kind of cheating if you're watching it together. An activity that I think many of us indulge in from time to time is Netflestination, when Netflix is a very good tool for procrastination, and some of us might have Netflix buddies who help us get through the interesting series and sometimes split the costs of the subscription. So I think this is also a very good example and a very good illustration how something can shape our language in a major way, and by it shape how we think about the world and some of the things in it. Now, a little bit more serious topics now. Of course, English language, like any other language, reflects that as well. So global events, changes and transitions, news of all sorts find their reflection in any language. And we're going to have a look at English language in particular. And here what I find interesting is how English language describes the evolution of the notion truth. Is there such a thing at all? And a few examples that I decided to talk about are here on the slide. The oldest of these 4 is the expression economical with the truth that appeared in 1986 when a British politician, Sir Robert Armstrong, used it in a trial. It is a euphemism for saying lying. We lied, we concealed the truth. And that's interesting how people play with the language and play with the truth to create a different way of looking at it. Let's put it that way. Another interesting word that was coined in 2005 by Stephen Colbert is truthiness. and I'm sure you know what it means, but I'll just remind you that it's the feeling of something. Something must be true because I think so, I believe so, I feel so, even though the facts might not support that. So irrespective of what is objectively going on and what the facts are saying, I stick to my feeling of truth, and that is truthiness. Now, we can also hear about multiple truths and post-truth, which was the word of the year for 2016 by Oxford Dictionaries. And that's again shows us how truth is a very important topic, but the society is thinking, is verbalizing and conceptualizing it in new ways. And that's an interesting phenomenon, in my opinion. Well, of course, there are other words that come to mind if we think about truth and all the words in a language connected to it. There are, of course, fake news and smear campaigns and manipulating and fabricating facts, but I'm not going to talk about it here. What I'm going to mention, though, is how much the language nowadays, English language in particular, focuses on political discourse and tendencies. We're going to see more examples later on, but here are some examples of how language reflects what's going on in the world. And here are examples from different spheres and of different phenomena. Some of them are political, like Brexit, that you know about, Trumpiness, but some are just a reflection of other kind of news, like for example the verb phrase "to Meghan Markle it," which denotes doing something your own way, breaking the rules. And I think it's a great example of how one individual can also leave a mark on the language. Well, there's tons of vocabulary that reflects technological changes and innovation. I just chose one example that is grammable to describe any images worthy of Instagram. And another word that I decided to put here is anti-vax. That became a very big topic, and that is just an example how a word can become a reality in itself. Now, some of the things that we need to realize when we think of language and how it changes is that when new words appear and when they are added to a dictionary, like for example this online resource dictionary.com, that is not without a reason. And as this article that appeared after 300 words were added to dictionary.com, they all show a very important, a very significant trend. And in the words of the authors, the addition of over 300 new words and definitions to its online archive is reflecting the latest use of language as it relates to identity, culture, repression, and technology's influence on modern life, both online and offline. And there is a big portion of political words from witch hunt to compromat, that were added to the dictionary in 2019. And if you're interested, you can find the link in the description. I'm going to include all the links so you can learn more and get to the bottom of it if you really want to. Now, that was 2019, and 2020, as we know, was a very special year. And of course, it produced its own words and phrases. And let's look at some of the trending words of 2020. Another resource that helps us see the dynamics of a language is Macmillan dictionaries. And every year they select 10 of the most interesting trending words. You can find the whole quiz online. The link is going to be in the video description. But I suggest to do a little quiz now with just 3 words from their list. So the words are ghost kitchen, green swan, and cobot. And I'm going to give you 3 variants of answers for each of the words, and you can leave your answers in the comments. So let's do this little quiz. Let's test how well you know the most recent up-to-date English. So what is a ghost kitchen? A kitchen in an abandoned restaurant. B, a kitchen which prepares restaurant-style food for delivery only. Or C, restaurant staffed with robots. What is a ghost kitchen? Now, question number 2. What is a green swan? A, an unexpected event caused by climate change that has an impact on economies around the world. B, a new species of swan discovered in the tropical forests of Central America. Or C, a swan that is marked with a patch of green dye so its migration can be tracked. What's a green swan? And the last question, what is a cobot? Is it a robot available in bright colors? Is it an online assistant helping college students? Or is it a robot that works alongside humans to help them at work? You can leave your answers in the comments if you want some feedback, or if you want to discuss them, whether you think these are worthy of being called trending words of 2020. And we are going to talk about the infodemic and the pandemic that marked the year. I think the word of the year should probably be COVID-19 or pandemic, according to dictionary.com. That is the year 2020, the word for year 2020. And the year has been very prolific in terms of language. It gave rise to hundreds of words and expressions to describe our pandemic reality. And as dictionary.com put it, pandemic dramatically reshaped our language, requiring a whole new vocabulary of talking about the new reality. And it did. And so here are a few examples. And so my question for you would be, How often did you come into contact, or how often did you deal with such things as COVIDiots, twindemic, quarantines, maskne, or Zoom fatigue? Is there any phrase or word that you particularly like? I mean, a pandemic word or phrase. Is there any phrase that you used a lot during these times? Maybe you have a favorite word or expression? Please leave your comments. I'll be really interested. All right, and let's talk about global trends now. They are particularly true for the Western world, and they are quite broad and massive. And the language is just a reflection of what's happening in a wider world, but I think we can find a lot of examples of the importance of all things being friendly, user-friendly, minority-friendly, pet-friendly, etc. and etc. There's a big focus on being conscious. Again, mental illness conscious, environment conscious, and so on and so forth. And what you can see in a lot, quite a lot actually, in English language media space is the talk about inclusion and diversity. And it's not only reflected in the language, but of course it is a much more broader encompassing reality. It is the changes that are happening. These are real actions and changes going on, and some parts of the world are doing more than others. But if we're thinking and speaking about a language, I think we're going to see more and more examples of these words and any other related words more and more, and they are going to become a staple, a kind of a stereotype in the future, because this is a global trend, and I don't think it's going away anywhere anytime soon. And I'm going to finish with a few words about how words are formed in a language, and I'm just going to have a look at a couple of examples, two patterns in fact in English language, but we can find them in other languages as well. The first would be shortening words and using a shortened version of a word. Now I think anybody knows what a veggie is, what's convo, improv, delish, or there are tons of other examples like fave, match, etc., etc. What's interesting though is that these highly informal words are gaining more and more momentum, more and more importance, and you can see them more and more in the press, in the written language, in writing. So I think the trend that we can see is the rise of informal language becoming more and more the norm. And the second pattern that I would like to mention here is joining two words together to form a new one, kind of gluing words together into one. And such words are coined, sometimes for a product like a cronut, a kind of a pastry, and its name gives credit to croissant and donuts. Celebrities such as Tyra Banks can coin words like smize, which is smiling with your eyes, a very important and necessary skill. Another shout out to the pandemic vocabulary is doom scrolling, that appeared recently for the activity of when people scroll the news for the most negative and pessimistic news. Or reactgy, that appeared first in the Slack app for the to denote emoji that people use solely as a reaction to somebody's comments or question. But since many people use these things in various chats, this word reactgy became quite popular because it's a much needed word to describe what everybody already is doing. But now we have a word for it. And so I think that is beautiful, how language catches up with reality. It reflects the changes that happen, new phenomena and new activities that people engage in. And that's interesting, how it lives and breathes and grows. And that's why it's always interesting to see language in its dynamics. And these, of course, are just some of the patterns, some of the trends, some of the particular things about English language. There's much more to talk about. And if you'd like to mention something, please go ahead and leave a comment. You can leave a question if you have any about the presentation, or if you'd like to add something, I'd be really happy to hear your feedback. So thank you for your attention. My name is Farida Mukjanova, and I'd like to see you here again. Bye bye.